Cicero's beer school back when I was a drinker here in St. Louis. I brewed for a little brew pub here in St. Louis where I got my start called The Stable, which is no longer here. But that's how long ago I lived here and worked here. From there, I went on to brew at Two Brothers in Chicagoland. And then I took a job with New Belgium that basically consists of traveling and drinking horrible tasting beer. So super fun. As he said, I cover a region. I have 6 states for New Belgium, and I'm sent out to diagnose off flavors, train distributors and retailers, and get to see our beer in other markets, which is a lot of fun. Today, like he said, we're going to cover a little bit about sensory, just to get us started, so we're talking the same language when we go into talking about good oxidation versus bad oxidation. Is there anything in specific you guys want to learn today when we're talking about cellaring and aging beer? So I can make sure I cover it. Yes? Absolutely. I'm going to go ahead and just answer that one because it's not really built totally into the presentation. So what I would recommend doing is putting a $2 thermometer in there and maybe watching, like in a closet, maybe watching it for two seasons, winter and summer, to kind of see your big temperature gap. We're shooting for under 60, 65 worst case scenario for cellaring. I'd recommend buying styrofoam crates, like the bait tackle coolers, and that will actually do a lot of insulating on its own and keep that beer closer to that 50-degree mark. No, okay, no closets or anything interior. Wire racking in a central place away from a heat source and a light source you could probably get away with, and then keeping them in like those styrofoam coolers again. That's going to keep light out as well as kind of control temperature swings. But we'll go deeper into cellaring toward the end. So we use a combination of all of our senses. I'm really big into sensory. I'm kind of a geek when it comes to sensory. Has anybody ever played the game Bean Boozled? Yes. I do that for fun. I like to eat horrible tasting things for fun and watch the reaction. So today we're going to cover visual, how does a beer look, aroma, how does that beer smell, and then taste and mouthfeel and body. So for visual, at New Belgium, we cover the 4 C's. Color, which is an indicator of the malts used in a beer, how well they were kilned. And then clarity, was that beer filtered or is it bottle conditioned? Carbonation, does the beer have a nice head? And does it look alive in your glass or is it flat and still? Cleanliness, does that head collapse quickly? A lot of people are like, why do you cover cleanliness? Because when you get that in beer in your hand, you're visually looking at it, and the final steps of how that beer was cared for are going to make a big impact on how that beer tastes and looks to you. So if the glass is dirty, that head could collapse quickly. If there's bubble patches, you know it's clinging to something that probably shouldn't be in your glass. So I should probably explain this because you're all looking at me crazy. We are doing a whole bottle of Fat Tire because we are going to have this as a reference point. We're going to drink out-of-date Fat Tire today, and you're going to do a cross-reference. This is all fresh. This should all be delicious. Hey, Carrie, can you check a bottle and let me know the best by date on it? So this is the freshest stuff at our distributor's warehouse, and I will, as soon as she hands me one, I will read you guys the March 19th, and what day was it packaged? Can you tell me, or do you want to? Can I steal someone's bottle and let you know? Sweet. So in our brew number, which is the really long number at the bottom, the first 2 days are the year. So this was packaged in 2016. Then you'll see the next 2 are the month, November, and the next 2 are the day. And on this one, that would be the 11th. So November 11th of 2016, this beer was packaged. Thank you. So color, we use the SRM method to really look at the different colors. I personally like to use wood grains when I talk about beer. I feel like it makes me sound fancy if I'm telling you it's mahogany in color. Those of you who are the Crayola generation, I really like to use like burnt sienna. Romance that beer, use those fun adjectives. Clarity, these are the uniform words that we use at New Belgium. Bright means it's clear, it looks filtered and brilliant in your glass. Sheen means that there's small particles within the glass, but you can't individually pick them out. You can just see, you can just kind of see that it's not crystal clear. Haze, you're going to see uniformly dispersed particles. You can make them out, but they seem pretty uniform. And then particulate, we like to call chunky monkeys, flocking sea monkeys in your beer. We have all kinds of fun names for them at the brewery. Carbonation, which of these 3 beers would you like to be served? The center, right? So the first one's clearly wild. Things are going wrong with carbonation. The second one looks like it should in a beer commercial. And that third is sometimes what we often receive, which is that undercarbonated, flat beer. Kind of lifeless, looks like apple juice to me. So what does aroma tell us about beer? Aroma is actually 80% of what we perceive as taste is actually smell. So the aroma of a beer is far more important than almost anything else going on. Smells direct. We actually have to get our nose in close enough to smell something. Humans can perceive about 10,000 perceptible aromas, but our brain can only process up to 3 at a time. So we might pick up 3 different compounds in something, take a break and come back to it, and you might be able to get 3 more. But your brain just can't, it's overload. So a lot of people ask me, is your palate better than mine? Or why can you pick this out and I can't? This is practice. Those of you that are regulars at beer school, you absolutely get this. Basically, you know, the whole knowledge is power. That's what this is. Repeating trainings are what's going to take you to that expert level, whereas novices are going to react more emotionally. This smells like the butterscotch in my grandmother's purse. Like, whereas if I smell butterscotch, I'm going to be like, this smells like diacetyl. There's a problem. So that's the difference between expert level and novices. And there's nothing wrong with being a novice because ignorance is bliss. I know nothing about wine and I love it. So we'll talk about ortho versus retro real quick. There's 2 different types of smelling. Ortho is when you bring it up to your nose and just sniff. So it goes in through the nose. Retro is when you actually take a sip of something, let it warm up on your tongue, and then you breathe it out your nose. Have any of you ever been like in a group after lunch and you felt a burp come on and you tried to hold it in because it was rude and you kind of burped it out your nose a little? Well, you are always like, why did I do that? That was awful. That's retronasal. You guys are sensory scientists. So the brain actually processes those 2 types of aromas differently. One is tied to more of the analytical side of your brain and the other is tied to emotional. So it's kind of fun to make sure you're experiencing the full realm. Taste. There are 5, possibly 6 tastes currently. It's fun to me that we are still learning more about sensory science every day. So the 5 are sweet, sour, salty, bitter, and umami. Does anybody know what umami is? Nope. Savory, yes. How many of you, when you went to school, learned umami as one of the tastes? Okay, you're young. I'm old. So umami's a newer one. The 6th taste that's actually being certified right now is fatty. They're actually determining that fatty has its own taste. How many of you learned that beautiful tongue chart back in school? This area only tastes sweet. Pretty much everybody. Do we have a swearing threshold in this room? Are we okay with swearing? Prefer not? We're okay? Okay. All right. Well, that's bullshit. Let's get that out. That has been debunked. So as you can see on the other chart, let's see if this works. Yep. We have hundreds of papillae on our tongue. And in those papillae, we host taste buds. And those taste buds have receptors for sweet, sour, salty, bitter, and umami. So all of them are in the actual papillae. There are concentrations where there's more papillae than others, and that's maybe where the tongue chart theory came from. But the taste buds actually have receptors for all the taste. So the chart's wrong. I found this kind of fun. So sweet, sour, salty, bitter, and umami. Human nature says we need these things, and it goes back to the beginning of time. Sweet indicates, if you're having something sweet, it indicates energy-rich foods. If you're wanting something sour, you're probably not wanting something sour, but sour is unripe or spoiled foods. Salty indicates an electrolyte misbalance. Bitter's toxicity. And umami, again, is protein-rich and ripe foods. So what are the two biggest trends in craft beer? Sour and bitter. So those are considered the two bad tastes. So we kind of go against, we rebel against our human nature every time we reach for that IPA or that beautiful aged lambic. So I think that's kind of fun that we're, craft beer drinkers were rebels. Mouthfeel and body. This is I could talk for 30 minutes just on mouthfeel and body, so I'm going to try to cut it down. But carbonation is actually pain receptors processing it. Same with alcohol warming. So when we talk about mouthfeel and body, we also talk about mouth coating. Does it coat your mouth? Is it slick? Like sometimes diacetyl beers leave a slickness on the roof of your mouth. Astringent. Does it taste like tea that you left the tea bag in too long and it immediately dries out on your tongue? Metallic is actually a mouthfeel. It is not a flavor. Metallic has to react with lipids in your skin to oxidize and create that metallic aroma. So if you ever think you're tasting metallic, a good trick is to take it and dab it on the back of your hand and then bring it up to your nose. That will show you that there are, in fact, metal ions in the beer. So different. And then viscosity and body. Body is how filling. That's the definition of body. That's really overwhelming. This is how I talk about body. Light, medium, and full. And of course, anywhere in between those realms. So again, carbonation is pain. Carbonation also makes liquid feel lighter than it is. Those little bubbles are carrying that liquid off your tongue. So it's going to feel lighter and less full. So people often think that Guinness is very heavy. Nitrogenation has smaller bubbles, and those smaller bubbles are able to carry less liquid off to your tongue. So therefore, you think it feels heavier, but it's actually one of the lightest beers out there. So that's kind of the science behind that. All right. Now we're going to officially drink our fresh fat tire together. I hope you've been drinking it. If you guys have an empty sample cup in front of you, I don't know, I'd recommend pouring it, and then we'll go through it together here. So we always recommend holding it up to the light so you can get a true color assessment going on. Obviously, we've got a lot of cool colors going on in this room, but I like this part to be interactive. What color is this beer? You guys are cheaters. It says so on the bottle. No, what else? Amber's a great answer. Trending copper. Pulling it out with the metal tones. I always like copper. I feel like that one's good. Okay, so orangey hues, copper, amber, beer. Then we're going to do what's called a swirl and drive-by. So sensory scientists over in England who create off-flavor tablets for Aroxa have said that 1.5 seconds swirled counterclockwise will open the most aroma for you to perceive. So if you want to be geeky, we can get that geeky. So let's go ahead and swirl for 1.5 seconds. And then we're going to drive it by a couple inches under our nose. And just try to get an initial aroma there. The reason we're doing that is if we go right in, we're going to oversaturate our olfactory neurons. So we want to kind of back it up and just get a little. Then we do 2 short sniffs like a dog. So anything you're questioning off that drive-by, now you're going to go in and get those 2 short sniffs. And wow, that mic really picked that up. And then we're going to do our retronasal. So everybody take one small sip, let it sit on your tongue and warm up, and then swallow and breathe out your nose. Got it? Does that open up other flavors for you? For me, it always makes that caramel way more apparent. Bread crust for you, caramel. Should be getting some floral notes off the fat tire. Okay, and then at this point, we just drink it. So fat tire on its own, 5.2% ABV, 22 IBUs. We use Willamette Goldings for dry hop, both of those. And Target is our bittering hop in this beer. We use pale malt, C80, Munich, and Victory. So C80 is what's giving us those caramel notes. That Munich is giving us some beautiful bready, toasty notes. And the Victory is what gives us the nutty flavor that some people can perceive from this beer. So off on this side, you can see a chart. And this is a spider graph that we use in Sensory to kind of rate threshold levels of different compounds in a beer. So fat tire graft has more sweetness than bitterness. It has more caramel notes than grainy notes, but you'll see that sweet, nutty, and caramel are some of the big ones. You'll notice E-hex down here, ethyl hexanoate. That's a main characteristic in our fat tire yeast strain that can give off green apple aromas and fresh cut fennel. I really notice this a lot in our canned fat tire because we can condition that beer, so there's extra yeast going on in there, and that leaves just this beautiful fennel aroma. So, does everybody, not quite yet, have the out-of-date fat tire? Most people? Yes? Okay, we'll dive in. So we're going to do the same thing with out-of-date fat tire. I'm thinking this is the out-of-date one, correct? Okay, no problem. Yeah. So this is not that out of date. It's out of date, but it's not like a year out of date. This is out of date as of October 16th. So going on 2 months out of date. Oh, so thank you for asking, Carrie Bryan. Fat tire has a shelf life of 4.25 months is what we call it. So 21 weeks. Thank you so much. 21 weeks is our fat tire shelf life. So this is out of date. Let's go ahead and compare them visually. All right. I hear it being whispered, but nobody's brave enough to say it. It's lighter. You guys win. Yes, it is lighter. The melanoidin malts actually have a reaction that lighten over time. A melanoidin. It's basically a compound that's created in the caramelization of malts, which is coming from our C80 malt in this beer. So caramel malts and melanoidins, brewers use those terms pretty interchangeably. Then I don't really see a haze in this. There's no like chunky monkeys going on. Clarity-wise, it's still pretty good. So let's go ahead and drive it by. Ooh, big difference for me. Yeah, I'm seeing nods. Let's do our 2 short sniffs. And then let's do 1 small sip. Let it sit on the tongue, warm up a little, swallow, and breathe out the nose. Ooh. Mouth drying, right? Definitely. So there's some stuff going on in here, and we're going to talk about what's going on in this gross fat tire. So the big one we're getting on that end that's papery and cardboardy, that is what is known as trans 2-nonenal. So a lot of lighter beers oxidize very strongly this way. A lot of darker beers tend to oxidize more toward that sherry and port kind of flavors. Fat tire, I think, picks up the gamut. I feel like I'm getting vegetal in there. I'm getting sweaty socks. Lots of good stuff. But visually, these beers are pretty much the same, perhaps a little bit lighter. Aroma, I got papery, I got sherry notes. And then flavor, stale, cardboardy, and mouth drying. So you can see this is a beautiful sciencey graph that show that right away hop and ester aromas are the first thing that start to deteriorate. Then from there, some of those cooked cereal notes from the actual mashing process start to become more apparent. And then sherry-like characteristics are one of the last to develop in the aging process. Yes? It certainly could, depending on the conditions. For New Belgium, no. All of our canned beers are can conditioned, meaning there's extra yeast in there. But we do build that into our best by date, so our canned fat tire has a longer shelf life than our bottled fat tire. Usually around that 26-week window for most of our beers. So as you can see over time and months, some of the flavors really come up. Caddy, tomato leaves, black currant leaves, I've heard, are pretty common. That sweet toffee-like, to me, just increases a lot in fat tire. It becomes a much sweeter beer and less balanced. So oxidation is a really broad word that just means stale. Means it's coming into the presence of oxygen. So there are so many off flavors, or so many different aromas that can come from just oxidation. Think about all the crazy things we put into beer these days. What have we put into beers lately? Wild carrot seed. We've done coconut. We've done curry. We've run the gamut too. Watermelon. Yes, watermelon, lime. Every single thing you put into a beer is going to oxidize differently. So that's why there's an entire flavor wheel dedicated to those aromas. So focusing on the most prevalent ones, rotten vegetables, which I was picking up in this beautiful sample. Dried fruit, fig, currant, and raisins are very, very common off darker malts. You may notice those a lot in Belgian beers. The yeast strain and the dark malts tend to complement and create more of that fig raisin. Vinous or wine-like. Soy sauce. Has anybody ever had a beer that tasted like umami or soy sauce? Yes, that's like the worst. That's like the end of the death of beer. So yes, sweaty socks. The big thing I want you guys to take away is that it's the dulling of key flavors. This beer is not so horrible that I'd run and like chuck it out the window, but it's nowhere near as vibrant as the other beer. So, obviously, we know that oxygen probably causes oxidation. It's a good safe bet here. So, what really leads to make stale beer? Time and temperature. Beer is liquid bread, and bread has a best by date, and so does beer. That's why we try to purposely put ours on the bottle so that we're being transparent to you guys, the consumers. Temperature, it accelerates those reactions. So the warmer the beer gets, the faster it's going to die. The colder you keep it, the longer it's going to live. So 2 to 3 times faster for every 10 degrees in temperature is how fast you can kill it. These are complex chemical reactions. There's actually, question? Yeah, swings do make a difference, actually. There's some people who refute that, but the sensory scientists at New Belgium agree that temperature swings do make a difference. It's more the extremes, but the subtle warming and cooling from going, from the grocery store to your car and then back in the fridge aren't really going to damage a beer. Long, prolonged times at high temperatures is what's really going to do it. I would say if you get a beer over 80 degrees, you're murdering it slowly. If you get it over 100, it's just done. On a night like tonight, I'm not going to lie to you. I work in quality, and I am horrible about this. horrible. I leave beer in my car constantly. On a night like tonight, I wouldn't worry about it unless it freezes. Freezing actually really messes with the chemical structure of the beer. And we use a technique to filter out chill haze at the brewery, and freezing it is going to bring back and change the clarity of the beer and make it fuzzier when you look at it, have a sheen or a haze, and possibly even create particulate. How much DO, dissolved oxygen? So breweries try to mitigate oxygen at every step of the brewing process except one. When we're pitching yeast, we also add in O2 because the yeast needs that to grow and bud off new cells. Other than that, we keep oxygen completely out of the process. And our packaging, we've got it down to less than 3 parts per million of oxygen in our canning process, and we still think that's too much that we add in yeast. So we work our butt off to keep oxygen out. What are the temperatures we're really looking for? We like to keep our beer between 33 degrees and 50. That's a requirement of our distributors. So when they come to the brewery and pick up our beer, they ship it cold. They put it into a cold warehouse. They take it out on cold trucks, and especially kegs, go right into a cold cooler. So we do everything we can. We build 30 days warm storage into our package shelf life because we know that displays sell beer, and sometimes we can only get on a warm shelf, but we try to keep only 30 days of inventory warm. Freshness dating. If you don't already look at this, you should. Be an informed consumer. Look at your bottles. Your cans are usually done on the bottom. Bottles may have it on the neck. Right now, every brewery is doing it a little bit differently, but start looking and learning what your brewery does. That way you can make sure you're getting the freshest beer possible. This was a little bit on the temperature. This is from Charlie Bamforth. He is like the man of teaching brewing science at UC Davis. So this is done for pasteurized beers, more of those macro tunnel pasteurized beers like Bud Miller Coors. So they say that if kept 32 degrees for their whole life, a Bud Miller Coors product will be good up to almost 700 days. If we get up to 50, we're only good at less than a year. And then as we get up to like room temperature, you're less than 100 days, you're at like 3 months. So you can see how quickly that temperature changes it. Any questions on just bad oxidation? What's going on here? Yes? Nope? Yeah. Recommendations like what beer should I cellar? And then we're going to cover what should I expect. I want to preface this whole section with a couple things. Number one, if you're cellaring beer because you just want the experience, good for you. This is about you and what's going to make you happy, and my style expectations are bogus. So I want you guys to still have fun. Don't overthink cellaring. But the second part of that is always have an expectation. Like, why am I putting this in my cellar? What am I hoping to achieve? Because if you're just putting it down there because you think someday you might drink it, you're just letting beer die. So have a goal. I'm cellaring this because I want to see if more caramel character comes out in this lawfully. Is it going to be like that straight sour that we typically get, or are we going to get more of that Belgian candy sugar caramel flavor? Have a goal when you're doing it. And then the other thing I would say is don't cellar anything you're not going to drink right now. Buy 2. Drink one now, cellar one. I'm a big proponent of that. So my entire job, I should also say this, my entire job is making sure that beer is consumed the way our brewers intended it. Cellaring goes against all of that. So if you hear the slightest negative tone towards cellaring, that's where it's coming from. Ignore it. If you cellar for it and it's something that makes you happy, do it. So temperature we talked about. Under 60 degrees is best. I cellar at 38 because I like to cellar within my kegerator too, and 38's the optimal draft temperature, so 2 birds, 1 stone. Nicole Ernie, who works for the Cicerone program, she recommends cellaring at 33 degrees because that's basically where beers are lagered. So especially if there's still yeast in the bottle, it's a bottle conditioned beer, you're essentially slow maturing it and controlling it. That higher the temperature, the more prone you are to get technical off flavors like that trans 2-nonenal. If you go slow and cold, you're going to get more melded flavors. Temperature swings, like we talked about, can allow gas to go in and out. And store it in the coldest part of your house, like we talked about. Extra refrigerator is my recommendation. I'm a dork, and I even took the light bulbs out of my refrigerator because I don't even want the light of opening and closing it. But you don't have to be that much of a dork. How to store. There's so much out there on this topic. Upright, on its side. For the vast majority of beers, I would say store them upright. In Belgium, they do store, like Cantillon stores theirs on their side, but they also serve it in a basket that cradles it at that position so that you're not pouring sediment. So kind of a give or take there. So bottles with caps, absolutely store those up. If you store them on the side, you're going to risk rusting and completely ruining the beer. Cork and cage. If we're talking long term, I might recommend putting it on its side and rotating it a quarter of a turn every 6 months. Corks dry out and lose their elasticity over time, and then oxygen can easily ingress. If you have some kind of moisture going to it for long-term aging, you're going to keep that cork still full and not dry. However, there is also the school of thought that carbonation is carrying small amounts of liquid back up to the top and keeping the cork moist. So it's really your preference and whatever kind of school of thought you align to. If you can control humidity, like if you're a major geek on this, if you can control the humidity, you want between 50 and 70%. Any questions on this? Everybody's eyes are like super intense. Bretta, you guys are drinking a new beer. We should tell you what it is. Okay, you're gonna have 2. Don't drink the second one. Wait for me, okay? This one we can totally drink as we go. This is our Bretta IPA, and we have 3 beers on draft right now, and at the end, Carrie will tell you all about them if you want. But they are 1554 Black Lager. This is a cellared Bretta IPA. And then we also have a brand new beer, first bar in all of St. Louis to get it today. It's a collaboration with Anne Francois, the brewmaster of Orval, and it is a spiced Imperial Brown Dark Belgian Ale. We like to name things super simple. But this is cellared Bretta IPA, and it's delicious. And we're going to talk about cellaring Bretta beers, and I'll tell you more about this beer when we do that. So, lighting is the last part. If you're storing, you absolutely want to keep beer out of true natural sunlight. That's the biggest thing. Lights from your, light switch you're turning on in your closet, as long as you're not leaving it on all day long, you're probably fine. It's probably not going to make much of an effect. Sunlight is the devil, as it says. Yeah. Did you like my built-in joke? Yeah, that was for you, Carrie. You're not total ginger. You're a day walker. So, avoiding light is going to reduce skunky flavors like that green bottle blues we often get. So the darker the better. Style recommendations. As you mentioned, alcohol is a preservative, and those have longer lives. So if you're going to cellar something, I highly recommend 8% and above. So again, it's a preservative, and it's going to try to stave off some of that oxidation. Strong flavors rule. I break the rules sometimes, and sometimes I will cellar smoked lagers. Smoke, I want to see how it dies out and how the malt plays in. So definitely strong flavors that are going to fade over time and give you access to new flavors within a beer is a great way to go. Sours. Sours can be a tricky beast when it comes to cellaring. Some sours still have natural bacteria and flora going on and will continue to sour over time, whereas others, the yeast has been removed. And at that point, the sour is just going to die out. That's not necessarily a bad thing. If the beer was overly sour to begin with, and now you're backing it down a little and you're going to find some kind of balance or nuance within the malts, cool. You've now cellared it into something cool and different. If it was pretty balanced before, you might just end up with a sweeter, sugary mess. So just kind of thinking about those things when you go to cellar sours. Bretta. Bretta is the absolute reason I cellar beer. Bretta is a natural yeast. It was the first yeast, actually. The most original forms of beer were likely fermented with Bretta. So funky beers were probably the first beers ever consumed. And Bretta can live forever. I actually know of breweries who have gotten Bretta infections from bottling one piece that had like one beer that had Bretta in it, and then all of a sudden all their beers became Bretta beers. Revolution actually just had the same problem in Chicago. Jolly Pumpkin has had that problem. Bretta it can live forever. We found it in 35-year-old bottles at our brewery of other breweries' beer. We've cultured their Bretta. It's still living 35 years later in a bottle. So it's a crazy little guy. Bretta in bottled beer, it may start out very barnyardy. This particular beer started out quite barnyardy, and now it's curving into more fruity pineapple, kind of stone fruit notes, and I'm also getting some herbal pickup from it. What are you guys getting? I'm getting the lemon. I also have a slight cold, so I'm kind of useless. Yeah. So it could be more of like a lemongrass flavor is what I'm getting, like a combined, but there is no wrong answer for this. It's your experience. Yeah. So it's cleaned up over time, less horse blanket and barnyard funk, and becoming more fruity and herbal. Bottle conditioned beers, I recommend if you can age bottle conditioned beers, do that because they will continue to develop. And then from there, if it is a pasteurized beer, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Rodenbach Grand Cru is pasteurized, and it's one of the most beautiful beers to age. So you're just going to give way to some of the stronger flavors, like that sour that comes through in Rodenbach Grand Cru is going to decrease over time, and some of those other flavors are going to become more prevalent. So this is the flow chart, essentially, of flavor expectations in aging. Bitterness decreases, any malt harshness is going to decrease as well. Then we're going to get those fruity and floral esters in a beer will start to decline, followed by those ribes. When I think of caddy, I think of like Simcoe hops. Those particular aromas are going to go down. Then we're going to see that wet paper and cardboard start to increase. Bready character and sweetness, so those caramel, bread notes, all of those go up. Metallic character will start to increase with melanoid and malts. Earthy characters increase. And then making our way to the bottom, wine and sherry become very prominent. And then the death is often meaty broth-like flavors. Another way that we could be getting those is autolysis, where the yeast cells actually burst and die in the beer, especially if it's bottle conditioned. And that's often described as hot dog water flavor. So, more hops isn't always best. Like we talked about that already. Changes to the body. 5 minutes. We'll be there. Okay. Changes to the body. Overall, you're going to see the body kind of thin. There are cases where a body may appear thicker in an aged beer, and that comes from the alcohol flavor itself, that warming alcohol flavor decreasing. That warming alcohol flavor actually makes you think it feels lighter in your mouth. So alcohol's lighter than water, and it makes it feel lighter in your mouth. So as the alcohol flavor decreases over time, you're also going to get a thicker body. So that is an option, but usually I think beers tend to taste thinner, have that thinner mouthfeel. So now we can drink this other beer. While we are drinking this last beer, this is Blackberry Barleywine, 10% alcohol, 50 IBUs at original point. You can see the malts and hops used. We also use blackberries and Belgian candy sugar in the brewing process. We use the yeast that can ferment up to 25%. Ours, we only shop for 10. This was packaged 13 months ago. Yes. We got one. Awesome. So I have now 3 minutes that I'm going to try to dive through this quickly. This is the initial taste. This is our sensory panel has released information every 3 months on this beer. So initially, bright, deep copper, red cherry tint, tons of caramel and burnt sugar, followed by berry and jam, mostly sweet with a smidge of sour and bitter towards the end, boozy and cloying, medium viscous body. Here's our 3 months notes. Visually looks the same. Berries are coming across slightly fake and cough syrup-like. Diacetyl is noticeable yet faint, and chocolate showing. 6 months, true to brand visually, and all of a sudden those things we thought in month 3, we don't think in month 6. So closer to true to brand, but a bit of sherry and papery starting to come out. Sweet with just hints of bitterness on the end, but everything else is true to brand. 9 month. Visually, this beer now has particulate. So we are bottle pouring, so some of you who got near the end of a bottle may actually see particulate at the bottom or a bit of a sheen or haze. It's pretty true to brand still with the aroma. Sherry, boozy, like brandy and Cabernet. That sounds delicious to me. Taste mostly sweet with hints of bitterness and a slightly astringent finish. They think if at anything, at this point, it's gotten thicker. So this is last month's taste evaluation. So true to brand except for a sheen. Less caramel and chocolate and vanilla, and more berries and jam. I think the berries are pretty forefront in this. So some prune and cherry notes and some papery notes are noticeable as through the aging process. Sweet, almost no bitterness, but the mouthfeel and body have remained true to brand. This is a fun thing to do, especially if you buy a bunch of bottles of something you're cellaring. Drink it every couple months and take notes and see what's changed. So, to wrap up, yes. Yeah, go for it. A vertical.
So if we do 5 years or 10 years, so instead of tying them over the months, like how I guess can you compare, or is it just for fun?
It's totally for fun. So I like to do verticals too, and you can just, if you want to be dorky and take notes like I would, and make a spreadsheet, you can do that.
Spreadsheet's another level. Vertical's fun. Does anyone else do verticals here? Ever done it?
Yeah.